Hey, welcome friends. Thanks for coming by my channel. I know Karen Reed's open statements started really early this morning and I overslept because I have a Bernedoodle that misbehaves late at night. I have a cat that cries at night and they were driving me nuts. And then there was the technical issues. I can't ever just jump on and get everything just ready because, I'm a one-woman band. So it's just me, and it's just me. So I am ready to get this started, but there was something I was going to say. I have ADD brain, so bear with me. There was something I was going to say about things going on. Just there's some other content creators that if you truly want to get caught up, I'm seeing a lot of people online saying, "Oh, please, get me caught up," and I'm like, "Oh my gosh," because I've been following this case since August of 2023, and I'm like, do you know all the shit that has gone on in the case and outside of the case and in between the case and outside of the case and up and down all around? It is craziness. Like, I am so invested that I am going to Dedham next week. So that's how invested I am. But it really is, it's hard for us that have been in this for so long, and then new people, which it's great because we want more people to know about the corruption that's going on in Norfolk County and Dedham, Massachusetts. But then it's like, it's like telling the same story over and over and over, and then especially one this long. So if my advice, if you want to get caught up, is I would go watch the pre-trial motions, all of them, because it's very, very important before the first trial. I would watch the whole trial, the first trial, and I would then, because what I did the first time around was, of course, I already knew about the case, but I would watch different attorneys on YouTube and people I thought a lot of what they had to say. So I recommend Melanie Little. She went through all of the motions and broke them down, did a fantastic job, and she's kept up with it. Let's see here. The lawyer, he didn't start in the beginning, but he has now. And what's neat about his channel is his dad was a former federal, he was a federal attorney, but I can't remember if it was prosecutor or a defense attorney, whatever the case, he was high up. So it's good to hear Peter's take and his dad's take about, how the judge is ruling, if the defense is, if it was a mistake on this decision or if the prosecution did a good job on this part. So I recommend lawyer, Melanie Little. The Glairer, he is a layperson like me, but he tells it like it is, and you can tell he really, really thinks a lot about what's going on, and he's been in it for a while. And of course, Turtle Boy. Turtle Boy was the person that he started reporting in April 2023, and I started August. So he was the one that, first of all, brought this case to light, because nobody would have known about it had it not been for him. He's crude, he cusses, he makes fun of people, but he's into satire, and that's his way. But he really, really got me to understand all the different people and the whole story. And so definitely check him out. I will sometime put the links to those and anybody else that I like. Oh, Nurse Kim and Auntie Deb, they're funny. Like, when you just need a break from seriousness, but you're kind of still in that, mode of, oh, you want to talk about it or listen about it. they crack my ass up and they put me in a good mood, and I can kind of decompress from being either, mad or mad at the prosecution and the judge. So, time for me to shut up. I got my notebook. I'm going to take notes this time. I didn't last time. And, it's okay, but a lot of people take notes, so I'm going to see if it will help me to remember some things instead of watching everybody's shows like 3 or 4 times a day, because that's what I would do. Anyway, so we're going to get started with opening statements, and let's hope this works. All right, let me back this up. Give me just a second. I'm still learning. But you know what is so awesome about the software that I'm using is it's free. I mean, you have to build the whole thing, but it's free. And if it's free, it's for me. Okay, so let's get started. Opening statements. We're going to start with Judge Beverly Canone. She is the judge that presided over the trial the other time. She, in my opinion, should have recused herself. And if you want to know why, I made a video about it, so check it out. And anyway, so I just call her Bev because I'm not too pleased with her. And we're going to see how she behaves this time around. She talks very condescendingly, is that even a word, to the defense. And prosecution gets to do pretty much whatever they want to. And the problem with that is Karen Reed is on trial. And as the defendant, she has constitutional rights and civil rights. And it's like Judge Canone doesn't even care. She didn't give a shit. I don't know what she's playing. I don't know if somebody has bent her ear and said, you need to do it this way, because you know what? Corruption and small town, whatever, that's what they do. So I will finally shut up and let's get this started.
So it's now time for the opening statements. Mr. Brennan.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Y'all let me know if you can hear the video, please, in the chat.
At 6:04 a.m. on January 29, 2022, the alarm bell sounded in the Canton Fire Department. Firefighter paramedic Timothy Meadow knew what that meant. His heart skipped a beat. He raced to his equipment and he picked up his bag, which was meticulous. There was a sign and a signal, and then there was a voice.
Okay, let me just pause right here. I am using the trial channel, and I just realized they cut out the jury instructions, and I'm okay with that. I've already seen it, but I just realized that. So actually we are going right into, this is Hank Brennan. He is the prosecutor. He's called the special prosecutor because he does not work for the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office. The assistant district attorney that tried this case last time was Adam Lally, who is the gentleman that is seated to the left of Brennan. And he just sits there. I don't know what he's doing, but he just sits there. So Brennan has been hired outside. He is a defense attorney, and he was only supposed to be hired for a certain amount, and then that amount has gone up. But whatever the case, I'm not pleased with him. He annoys me. And this is the first time that I'm actually going to see him try a case, so it should be interesting, because in pretrial motions, I wanted to stick a pencil in my ear, in this ear, because I was tired of hearing him and his whining and complaining. I mean, my gosh. Okay, sorry, I will calm down and get back to it.
Commanding that there was cardiac arrest. The most serious of calls for a firefighter paramedic, that means that a person's heart has stopped. He didn't know who it was, he didn't know where it was, He took his bag, he had just gotten to the station, and he rushed to the ambulance. He was one of the most senior paramedics that morning. Another paramedic, Anthony Flamati, would be running this mission. He jumped in the back of the ambulance, the door shut, and they headed off to 34 Fairview Road. As they drove, firefighter Nuttall could not see anything.
And of course, we're going to have commercials.
It's Tina Knowles!
We're going to have commercials because I don't pay for YouTube Premium. I'm too cheap.
But he couldn't hear anything other than the engine of the ambulance. He could feel it sliding across the road. It was near blizzard conditions. He calmed himself, he steadied himself. This is what the firefighters and paramedics are trained to do, to focus. And he focused on his task. He looked around the back of the ambulance to make sure all the tools were in place. The ambulance was meticulous as well. This was Anthony Flamati's ambulance, and it was well stocked. He calmed himself, and he thought about what was going to happen. What should he be looking for? What is his next steps? He played the scenario through his mind, and every calm was above him. As the car pulled up to 34 Fairview, the ambulance, he stood at the back door, the doors open, and he stepped out into bedlam. He could hear a woman screaming and shrieking, the cold, hard air slapping on his face, and the wind, blizzard conditions swirling around him. You will hear him tell you how he trudged towards those screams in the darkness to snow, and when he got there, he saw 3 women surrounding a man lying, not moving on the ground. He walked up to the man, and he reached down, and he tried to find any signs of life, pulse, anything, and he found nothing. And he got up and he walked over to the woman, and he walked over to that defendant, Valerie, and he told him that he thinks that man is gone. And then he heard the yell from Anthony Flamati, the chief, and he said, "Come back, let's go." Because you'll learn that in the cold, even if somebody's heart stops, even if they're presumed to have passed, sometimes you can still save a life. So you'll see on a gas can video, you'll hear from testimony, he went back to that man who's John O'Keefe. He went back to him, and that crew coordinated effort. They did everything they could to save his life. They got on their knees, they began CPR, and firefighter Nuttall will explain as he kneeled over John O'Keefe, he looked up, and the defendant approached him, and you'll see it on the video. Now, he wanted any information, because when you're trying to save someone, you want to know, are they on drugs, medication, do they have a heart condition? And he looked up at Miss Reed, and he said, "What happened?" And you'll hear her words through firefighter Nuttall. She said, "I hit him, I hit him, I hit him." And it was at that time, with the words of the defendant, that she admitted what she had done that night, that she hit John O'Keefe. Now those words didn't mean anything to firefighter Nuttall. They weren't in context, they didn't reconcile with the injuries, it didn't help him in his treatment, so he ignored it. Now, firefighter Nuttall is not a police officer. He is not an investigator, he is not a detective. He's a first responder. And so he takes that information, it was useless to him, he continues to work on John O'Keefe, trying to save his life. You'll see the team put him on a stretcher, and when they lift him from the ground, even though there is snow accumulating, underneath John O'Keefe is simply grass, hard ground, frozen, and beneath his body lay his cell phone. They bring him to the ambulance, and while they're bringing him to the ambulance, you'll see on the videos that other first responders speak to the defendant. One first responder, Mr. Flamati, she will say, I'll hit him, oh my God, I'll hit him. And then she was interviewed or asked questions for background information, not a criminal investigation, just background to try to help John. And she was asked questions about his background, and during that conversation, you won't hear her see the defendant was a person by the name of Jen McCabe and a firefighter McLaughlin And she tells Fire McLaughlin, the third first responder, has hit her. They bring Mr. O'Keefe to the Good Samaritan Hospital, and his body is cold. The doctors work feverishly. They treat him, trying to save him. They try to warm his core. And unfortunately, firefighter, not all first instincts is accurate. John O'Keefe passed. So why are we here today? We are here today because John O'Keefe was killed by the actions and conduct of that defendant, Karen Reed. You will learn through this case, through facts, science, and data, you will learn that on January 29th, 2022, when the defendant and Mr. O'Keefe were in front of 34 Fairview Road, all the way to the left side in the back corner of the flagpole, you will learn that Mr. O'Keefe got out of the car. He got out and he stood by the side of the road after an argument with the defendant. That argument, that anger fueled by heavy intoxication, we'll learn from the science and data as he stood by the side of the road, the defendant in her SUV drove away. She drove at least 35 feet away. The argument was over. It had ended. But then she stopped. She stopped. She put the Lexus into neutral, and she waited. And the facts and the science and data will tell you that despite the fact the argument is over, she then put the Lexus into reverse, put her foot on the gas pedal, and began to press. Not 25%, not 50%. Up to 75% acceleration. There was a light dusting.
Lies. They are all lies. Oh, and if you haven't noticed, I am biased and I am free Karen Reed all the way. And this guy, all he does is lies. And you can see him in the pre-trial motion hearings that all he does is lies. He even lies about the other attorneys. And I'm tired of his lies. And I hope he gets called out during this trial. Okay, let's resume.
In the snow, the Lexus tires spun backwards. She went backwards at least 70 feet. She clipped John O'Keefe. He fell backwards, hit his head, broke his skull, and there he lay at the corner of Fairview Road, on the ground, lying on top of his cell phone, alone. And then the defendant will later tell that when she left, he didn't look mortally wounded. Yet he was. And she simply drove away. Now, before I tell you about the data and the facts and the science, and I walk you through that, I'd like to tell you a little bit about John O'Keefe. John O'Keefe was a young man, a local kid, very well liked, loved. John O'Keefe is the son of Peggy O'Keefe, John O'Keefe Sr., and the brother of Paul O'Keefe. Grew up in Canton, worked hard, he became a police officer. But what you're going to learn, the fact that he worked for the Boston police officer, as a Boston police officer, was just a fraction of his life. It was a small, really unimportant part, because the biggest part of John O'Keefe is he was a family man. Not in the traditional sense. You see, John O'Keefe never had biological children. John O'Keefe was never married. But John O'Keefe had a sister, and she had 2 children. And when the children were 6 and 3 years old, his sister unfortunately died. And shortly after, his sister's husband died. John O'Keefe was at home. He didn't sit by. He saw these 2 recently orphaned children, and he stepped in and he said he was going to raise them. So he put aside his career, he put aside his job, and he moved in with the children and raised them like they were his home. They were his passion, his love. He was a new parent, successes, failures, like all parents. And he raised the children with the help of people in the community, with the help of his brother, with the help of his family. And they led a good life.
At Vistaprint, we print signs so people can see your brand up close. But we also print signs so that people can see your business here, see it here, and see it here, so you stand out, even when they're way back.
And by the time I mute it, I can skip it.
Karen Reed. Around COVID, the defendant and Mr. O'Keefe reacquainted, and they started a relationship. And you'll hear that even though the defendant had her own home, she was staying with Mr. O'Keefe a lot, 4, 5, 6 times a week. And to most of the world, it was a pretty good relationship. They spent time together, they did activities with the children together. She helped with driving the children, feeding the children. It was a steady relationship until about the beginning of 2022. And then things began to unravel. There was tension, there was arguments. In fact, just a few days before this incident, you'll hear that Mr. O'Keefe asked her to leave, but she wouldn't. You're going to be able to read text messages of their conversations on January 20, 2022. You will see the tension and the unraveling of the relationship. You will read about the discord between the defendant and Mr. O'Keefe. You will see that when he would ignore her calls, they would become incessant. When he would try to push away, she would come closer. You will read those text messages and you will realize that this was the beginning of the end of this relationship. That night, they decided they would go out together. And I want to tell you something about David and Silence before we get to that night. I mentioned that underneath John's body was a cell phone. A cell phone is an amazing piece of technology. It is like a computer. It carries extraordinary data. And when they found the cell phone, the only container that John O'Keefe that night, they studied the cell phone, and there'll be some remarkable data that you will use in this case to find the truth. I want to mention 3 different things you will find in a cell phone that are critical to this case. The first is called location data. Waze we've all heard of, Google Maps. Well, at some point that night, John put his Waze on, and Waze is like a breadcrumb that will show you exactly where the phone goes, second by second. It is the strongest, most accurate location data that you can have. And that night, John was using Waze. It also will have healthcare data. Healthcare data will show when somebody is moving. Sometimes it's qualified as steps, so it doesn't necessarily mean somebody's stepping. Moving their arms, walking, turning. It doesn't show what direction or how far, but it shows movement of a person. Okay. And the third thing, remarkably, will be an expert in this case who found a data file on the phone, and it tracks the temperature of the cell phone battery. That will be critical to your analysis in this case, the temperature of the cell phone battery. And so with that, I want to take you back to the timeline of that night. After the discord, both the defendant and Mr. O'Keefe decided they would meet at a bar called McCarthy's. McCarthy's is a local bar, a blizzard is pending, and people are getting together in a celebratory mood. They go to McCarthy's and you'll see a video of McCarthy's, and you will watch both Mr. O'Keefe, friends, and the defendant drinking alcohol. And you will count 8 vodka drinks that the defendant drank. They arrived at 8:50, they stayed till 9:45. She consumed at least 7 of those drinks in less than 2 hours. The last drink, you'll see when they leave the bar, she puts it under her jacket, and they walk out and they go to another bar to meet other friends called the Waterfall. They reach the Waterfall sometime around 10 p.m. And when they go into the Waterfall, you'll see a video. And when I say celebratory mood, you will see a group of friends of John O'Keefe, many who are friends with John, and you'll see them clapping and happy and joyous as they're there. You'll see many hugs between John O'Keefe and his friends and the defendant and many of the people there. And they spend some time together, they're drinking, and they all do a song. And that will be at least the 8th hit within 3 hours. That's consumed. You will see from the data, not just the cell phone data, but there's some other very important data, and the other piece of data that goes hand in glove with the cell phone is information on the defendant's Lexus vehicle chip. Black box in an airplane, when there's some type of event that captures a small amount of time, and that was captured in the defendant's Lexus. That black box information with the cell phone data will tell you everything you need to know in this case. that will bring us step by step through the entire night to the death on their feet. And so they leave the Guatemala Club, and you'll see that the ignition goes on to the defendant's Lexus. And both John O'Keefe and the defendant in the car will decide that they're going to go back to 34th Fairview Road that we talked about earlier. They're going to go there for a get-together for one of the homeowners' sons who's not going to go to the property. And so as they drive back, you will be able to follow them to this location data. When they go back to Fairview, they don't know exactly where it is, and they get lost. And so John O'Keefe makes a phone call. Has a phone call with one of his friends, Jen McCabe. And during that phone call, which the defendant listens to because he recounts it, and trying to get directions, Jen McCabe tells John O'Keefe, it's near Bella's mom's house. We'll learn that Bella, or her mom, was somebody that John had dated before this week. And so as they make their way to Fairview, you will see there's a road that comes down like a loop from the beach to Fairview. They take a wrong turn on the loop, and then they do a 3-point turn on the driveway. You see the exact precise driveway they turn into because some type of acceleration movement triggered that black box in the Lexus. And that's important because that's 7 minutes before the collision. And you'll see from the Waze exactly where the car was. You'll see from the black box the event of the 3-point turn in the driveway, and then a return down to Fairview. But before they get there, at 12:23, a truck is coming the other way. And the witnesses in that truck will say they blinked the lights, one of them saw a man and woman in the car, John and the defendant, and then they followed the Lexus because they were going to the same house. The truck stopped at the driveway, and the Lexus, the defendant's car, you'll hear, because of the Waze, can be counted second to second, never stops. It rolls very slowly all the way to the end of the yard in the corner where there's a tree iron flagpole, and they reach that location at 12:34:33. And they're in the car and they stay there. The truck waits, they speak to somebody in the house who's coming out, the person goes back in the house and they're there for about 5 minutes. We're now down to 2 minutes before the collision. The check leaves, and now it's just the defendant and John. And while they're waiting outside, 12:27, John gets a text from Jen McCabe, park behind us in the driveway. 12:29, she texts again, are you...
Okay, this is where I'm going to stop, and I'm going to take notes because one of the problems that the prosecution has had with this case is the timeline. It never makes sense. Their witnesses' statements don't fall in line with their time. It just doesn't make sense. So I am going to make sure I keep up with the timeline. So at 12:27, let me go back just a few seconds. Let's see.
Will say they blinked the lights, one of them saw a man and woman in the car, John and the defendant, and then they followed the Lexus because they were going to the same house. The truck stopped at the driveway, and the Lexus, the defendant's car, you'll hear, because of the Waze, can be counted second to second, never stops. It rolls very slowly all the way to the end of the yard in the corner where there's a tree iron flagpole, and they reach that location at 12:34:33.
Okay, so I didn't go back enough.
The truck waits, they speak to somebody in the house who's coming out, the person goes back in the house and they're there for about 5 talked about earlier. They're going to go there for a get-together for one of the homeowners' sons who's not going to go to the property. And so as they drive back, you will be able to follow them to this location data. When they go back to Fairview, they don't know exactly where it is and they get lost. And so John O'Keefe makes a phone call. Has a phone call with one of his friends, Jen McCabe. And during that phone call, which...
She's a mean girl, FYI.
And trying to get directions, Jen McCabe tells John O'Keefe, it's near Bella's mom's house. We'll learn that Bella, or her mom, was somebody that John had dated before this week. And so as they make their way to Fairview, you will see there's a road that comes down like a loop from a beach to Fairview. They take a wrong turn on the loop, and then they do a 3-point turn on the driveway. You see the exact precise driveway they turn into because some type of acceleration movement triggered that black box in the Lexus. And that's important. You get 7 minutes before the collision. And you'll see from the waves exactly where the car was. You'll see from the black box, the event of the 3-point turn in the driveway, and then a return down to Fairview. But before they get there, at 12:23, a truck is coming the other way. And the witnesses in that truck will say they blinked the lights, one of them saw a man and woman in the car, John and the defendant, and then they followed the Lexus because they were going to the same house. The truck stopped at the driveway, and the Lexus, the defendant's car, you'll hear, because of the waves, can be counted second to second, never stops. It rolls very slowly all the way to the end of the yard, in the corner where there's a tree line and a flagpole, and they reach that location at 12:34:33. And they're in the car and they stay there. The truck waits, they speak to somebody in the house who's coming out, the person goes back in the house and they're there for about 5 minutes. We're now down to 2 minutes before the collision. The check leaves, and now it's just the defendant and John. And while they're waiting outside at 12:27, John gets a text from Devin Cave, park behind us in the driveway. 12:29, he texts again, are you coming in?
Okay, here he's jumping timelines. I don't like that. I like to be chronological order. So if you're going to do a timeline, that's the whole point. It's a time and you do it in line, chronological line of order. So at 12:27, Jim McCabe text John. I'll just put first. Okay.
You'll hear that Jim McCabe others look out the window and see the defendant's Lexus in front of the flagpole at the far end. It's snowy, it's dark, it's windy, they're waiting. You will know that John O'Keefe was in that car, that Lexus, and didn't move because his healthcare data is not moving. It's not moving until 12:31:56. At 12:31:56, he begins to move. He will have 20 seconds before he falls. 20 seconds. He gets out of the car, the Lexus, and in that 20 seconds, you'll hear that user initiated. He looks at the phone, at the text message from Jennifer.
I'm sorry, that was me. Oh, I swear, I would have thought this was a Monday.
He used that phone. From the left on bar, you see that. And at that time, 12:32:09, last user, he has 7 more seconds to move before he lies dormant the rest of the night. We'll also have the information from the defendant's Lexus black box. The clocks run differently than 30-second barrels, but it's right in the heart of that time. And you will see in the data at that time, when he makes his last movements with the phone, is when her car leaves 34 feet at least, stops, neutral, and then shoots into reverse with the tire spinning right towards him, right where he got out. You'll know they're arguing because the next morning she tells the firefighter, I'm sad because our last moments were fighting. She drives away, and they said, she's made later statements that when she left, he didn't look mortally wounded. He lies on the ground on top of his phone, light dusting of snow, the snow now picking up. And he's just there. It's 12:37. Now, when he's in the car, before he gets to Fairview, the battery temperature of that phone is 77 degrees. 77 degrees in the one car. Now that he's been outside the car for 5 minutes, it drops to 72 degrees. She drives to his house. She makes a phone call at 12:33 after she left Fairview. She calls again at 12:36:34 and leaves a message. You'll hear it. And you will hear the anger and rage in her voice. She leaves a message. John, I fucking hate you. Pardon my language. who appeared with similarly. And if she leaves that message, he lies on the side of the road. He gets another text message that's unanswered. She's indicated. Where are you? 12:45. Battery temperature, 61 degrees. Stop. He gets almost 40 calls from the defendant that night. His phone rings, but he never answers. You'll hear from an expert that the light never initiates, the healthcare data never moves. John alone was only again in his phone. At 12:53, cell phone drops to almost 60 degrees. 12:59, the defendant leaves another message on John's phone. Now, she hasn't spoken to anybody. Nobody has spoken to her, but her message. Now, you'll learn the message says, John, nobody knows where you are. And this is where the plot in the cover-up begins. The evidence will make clear that she knew he was there. She did not call 911. She did not go back to him. She did not leave an anonymous tip. She left. The night wears on. It's now 1:07. Battery temperature 55 degrees. 1:14, she calls her mother. No answer. 1:14:53. Battery temperature.
We have these beautiful golden chandeliers.
Where's the hot sauce bar?
Shout out to Olivia, Ryan, and
I meant to hit mute. Come on, commercial. Okay, skip. Okay. Oh my gosh. What did I go to? Okay, hang on. See, I told y'all I needed y'all to practice. Let's see. Interact. Okay, hang on. Oh my gosh, I can't believe we did this. Never fails. I have some kind of crap mess up. Okay, I'm not going to get mad. I'm not going to get mad. This is why I didn't start at 7:30 this morning, besides oversleeping. This is why I create videos and I don't do live videos. And to those that can do it, y'all are awesome. Okay.
Every 1:56, he begins to move. You will have 20 seconds before he falls. 20 seconds.
Okay, can you hear the YouTube video?
He gets out of the car, Alexis.
Chat, just let
And
me
in
know.
that 20 seconds, you'll hear that user initiated. He looks at the phone, at the text message he generates. There's now 12:32:09. He closes the phone the last time. It will be the last time he uses that phone. From the left on bar, you see that he uses that phone. And at that time, 12:32:09, last user,
Okay.
he has 7 more kids similarly. And if she leaves that message, he lies on the side of the road. He gets another text message that's unanswered. He's indicated. Where are you?
Okay.
12:45. Battery temperature 61 degrees. Stop. He gets almost 40 calls from the defendant that night. His phone rings, but he never answers. You'll hear from an expert that the light never initiates, the healthcare data never moves. John alone was only again in his phone. At 12:53, cell phone drops to almost 60 degrees. 12:59, the defendant leaves another message on John's phone. Now, she hasn't spoken to anybody. Nobody has spoken to her, but her message. Now, you'll learn the message says, John, nobody knows where you are. And this is where the plot in the cover-up begins. The evidence will make clear that she knew he was there. She did not call 911. She did not go back to him. She did not leave an anonymous tip. She left. The night wears on. It's now 1:07. Battery temperature 55 degrees. 1:14, she calls her mother. No answer. 1:14:53. Battery temperature.
A 3% IRA match with
gosh.
Robinhood Gold.
I'm so sorry. But I'm not going to pay for YouTube. I'm just not going to do it. I'll just sit here and mute and skip. Okay, and we're back.
The defendant had healthcare data on her phone as well, and you'll hear that it stops around that time. And the way to learn that she admits to falling asleep with that night.
Oh my
Then
gosh.
5 o'clock, she is frantic. She wakes up John's niece, and she is unintelligible. She is yelling, she's screaming, she asks for the niece to call Jen McCabe. She calls Jen McCabe, and you'll hear Jen McCabe recount. Out of a deep sleep, she wakes up and she hears, Jen, 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 screaming John's name. John's dead. Hangs up the phone. Jen McCabe calls back. And then she, what's going on? And she told, well, I left him at the waterfall. At the beginning of the month. She told Jen McCabe, I left him at the waterfall. Jen called back and said, he's sorry to up front. You didn't leave him at the waterfall. She hangs up. He then minutes later calls another person, Terry Roberts, a friend of John O'Keefe. Someone who's not friends with the defendant, but they know because they helped raise the kids when they interacted. She had nothing to do with the night before. Wasn't at the bars. Was home with her family. She calls her and says, I think John got hit by a car. I think he's dead. Now Terry, with that information, calls 911. She calls hospitals. You can hear her voice. She's concerned. Not him. And then she gets another call from the defendant. And she tells the defendant, come to my house. I will help you look for him. And the defendant says, I was so drunk last night, I don't remember anything. Waiting for her to arrive, she learns she doesn't arrive. Instead, the defendant goes to Jen McCabe's house. Terry Roberts, the other friend, then goes to Jen McCabe's house, pulls behind the car. And when she does, she's on Bluetooth, and she can hear the defendant say, my taillight's broken, my taillight's broken. And she looks, and the snow packed in the back taillight, she can see a piece of the taillight missing. The defendant desperately wants to go to 34th Fairview Road, but Terry Roberts takes over and says, we're going to go back to John's house. Nathan's in the house and you didn't see him. So both cars, driven by Terry Roberts and then Jen McCabe, with the defendant, go back to John O'Keefe's house. You'll see a ring video where you see them go into the house and they look around.
Okay, did he just say that she said her taillight was broken and he said they looked and there was a piece of taillight missing? A piece? Did I hear that correctly? I'm going to jot that down.
Around and you'll hear about the woman, Jen and Terry, enlisted into this house. Look for John O'Keefe, they cannot find him. And then when Terry Roberts comes into a room, she sees Roger and looking, the defendant simply standing there, staring at the wall. At that point, the defendant insists they gotta go back to Fairview Road. They decide to take one car. Terry Roberts is taking charge. She's going to drive. They leave Mr. Reed's Lexus and John O'Keefe's driveway, and they drive back quickly to Fairview Road in vision light conditions. It is dark. They can barely see a thing. And when they get close to the edge of 34th Fairview, you hear the defendant start to scream, there he is. Both women look and they can't see anything. She starts kicking the door. The defendant's kicking the door. Let me out. Terry Roberts stops the car and lets her out, and she sees the defendant run exactly to where John O'Keefe is in the darkness. Just where she left him. Terry gets out of the car, starts to walk towards where the defendant is, and she sees the defendant lying on a body. She can't tell who it is because the face is still covered with snow. And she comes over and looks, and she wipes off the snow from John O'Keefe's face. She realizes he's one of her best friends in the world, is John O'Keefe. And she starts to try to do first aid. They start to move him, and coincidentally at 6:06, when they start to move him, the cold air hits that cell phone battery, it drops from 50 to 43 degrees. And they try, Jen McCabe calls 911. And that's when a police officer arrives, firefighter Nuttall and his crew. And when they lift him, that cell phone battery that is shot down to 37 degrees, Kerry Roberts picks it up and puts it in her pocket, and it immediately starts to warm as she moves to help get a data, showing movement starts again. At that point, nobody knows what happened. The Canton Police Department come. You can see the police cars and cruisers. They're not sure, so they look in the area where John's body is and find a collapse from the bar near his body. They find blood spots. They try to put the blood spots in plastic containers. They don't know what they're looking for at this point.
Plastic containers? Oh, Hanky Poo. He is so good with semantics. Those would be red plastic Solo cups that they borrowed from a high-ranking police officer that lived across the street to collect John's blood in. Solo cups, not plastic containers.
There's no information. They don't believe or know that there's a crime. They just know that John O'Keefe somehow ended up there with the broken glass in the blood. And so that morning, you can see the work of the police department try to uncover a little bit around his body to see what they could find, which was very little. And then, Terry Roberts goes and picks up Peggy O'Keefe, goes to the news, and they go to the hospital. They go to the Good Samaritan Hospital, and Terry Roberts is walking, and Peggy O'Keefe is going to go receive her son with her husband. And as she walks down the hall, Karen Reed is also in the hospital. See, there was some reports that maybe she was upset or suicidal, so they sectioned her. They put her into evaluation to make sure she was safe. You'll hear Peggy O'Keefe tell her she walked down the hall to see her son. The defendant was screaming, "Is he dead? Is he dead?" As she walked by Karen, she stopped and she said, "Karen, what happened?" And you'll hear that Karen was excited and yelling, "Is he dead?" Stops her excitement. He becomes stoic. He doesn't say a word.
You can save hundreds with Liberty Mutual.
Whoa!
Very.
Okay, anyways, so he sounds like he kind of glazed over how they searched, which they used leaf blowers to blow and heat up the snow to look for things. That's called contaminating the crime scene. Okay, let's get back to it. I can hit the skip now.
Kill all these people.
Decent kill.
Peggy pays respects to her son, and then she has to go back home because she has to tell the children. Now, while she's out, the Canton Police Department sent an officer to the house to make sure the children are safe because they're alone at their home. And when the officer pulls in, he doesn't notice anything, but you see in the dash cam video notices something. That tail light has a big missing piece to it. They can't find the children. Ultimately, Peggy comes home, her friends are with them, and they bring the nephew home, and he is distraught. And then Peggy hears a knock on the door. It is the defendant and her father. They want to come in. They come in, open doors, and they ask them to go upstairs in John's room. And she's busy consoling her grandson. They go upstairs, they're upstairs for about 15 minutes. They come down, and quickly they leave. Now they got there from the defendant's father, drove his wife and the father to that house. But when they leave, they take two cars. They take the Lexus with the broken tail light with them back to the defendant's father's house. And you will learn that when police start getting some of the information, they learn about the broken tail light, they learn information that she had told people that she had killed. They went down to see her. And on their way down, they decided they would get a warrant to take the Lexus. When they get down to Dighton, where the car is, you'll hear from Trooper Buchanan. He took a look and you can see the missing piece of Carol. They went in and spoke briefly to the defendant. They took the car, they brought it back to Buchanan. And so what to learn from the forensic evidence that will help with the science and data is that not only was the cell phone left behind, but also around that area, smoking taillight was littered around John O'Keefe's body. Littered around that area. When they got to the hospital, they noticed.
Bullshit. Bullshit. That is a bunch of bullshit. And that is the first time that, if you don't know, I don't know how to explain it because I've seen how he's been behaving before this. But that right there is, I'm going to call him out on that because that was not littered. It was not there when they first searched. And pieces came in. This person found a piece. And then somebody else found all these other pieces. It wasn't littered. And like Nurse Kim said last night, okay, so they had a bad storm. The snowplow drivers, go and do their routes. And, they're pushing the snow off the road. So how come the pieces are still right there in front of 34 Fairview? Why aren't they pushed on down or somewhere else? Why aren't they just littered? They weren't in one place. He is such a liar. Okay, calm down. I'll return to it.
There was a shoe missing. As time went by, snow melted. The one of the investigations found his shoe on a little berm on the border between the street and the grass. You learn days later when they did a plant excavation, they found his hat frozen into the ground. Ultimately, they would find over the course of 10 days that the snow melted almost all every piece of that broken taillight in that area. His hat, the sneaker, the glass. When the defendant left Mr. O'Keefe behind, took with her something of Mr. O'Keefe's or trace evidence. You'll learn on the back of her Lexus, around the taillight area, is John's DNA, and stuck to the side, grasping one last piece of John O'Keefe's film. Now, John O'Keefe fell backwards in his head after he was hit by the car. And you're going to hear from a very renowned doctor, a neurosurgeon, who's treated thousands and thousands of head injuries. And the wound on the back of the head, when he fell backwards, on the cracked skull, is called a basal fracture, to create an injury called counter-coup. After he was hit by a car and fell backwards and hit his head on that hard rock ground, remember there's no snow, it's just a dust at this point, the back of his brain hits the back of the skull and bounces up. When it bounces up, it leaves marks showing that impact. And this neurosurgeon will tell you, treated thousands of patients, that this injury, with reasonable degree of medical certainty, is counter-coup caused by falling backwards and hitting the head. When the medical examiner for the state looked at it, they generally said blunt force trauma had been determined. And so we brought it to the renowned neurosurgeon who does exactly this. You're also going to hear from the man that we can still see the name Jed Welchel. Does not work for the state police or local police. He was hired to take a look at this case and the data. So he will come in and explain to you exactly what I talked about. How the data from that black box coincides with the cell phone and the movements of the car, the moments before, during, and after the defendant struck John O'Keefe with her car.
We know that finding high-quality foods you can trust can be challenging. That's
Mute. Skip. Unmute, Heather.
There are three charges against the defendant in this case. The first one, second degree murder. When most people hear murder, they instantly think shooting somebody, stabbing somebody, killing, deliberate premeditation. All I want to start doing the law, I'm not going to start on that order, but I can tell you clearly, we are not going to try to prove that John O'Keefe tried to kill John O'Keefe. We're not going to try to prove to you that she intended or wanted him dead. That's not second-degree murder. What we'll prove to you is she engaged in an intentional act, driving back at him at that speed, in the storm, in the darkness, knowing that he was just gotten out of her Lexus. She intended that act, which would cause a plain, strong likelihood of death. That's what will include second-degree murder. Also, operating under the influence of alcohol, manslaughter will include that she drove her Lexus recklessly. She hit John O'Keefe, and because she hit him and he fell back, she caused his death. The third charge is being seen after knowingly causing death. Again, she hit Mr. O'Keefe with a car. She knew he was injured. She left him behind. And he died. That's what we'll do. This case will come down to the science and the data. The science and the data that cell phones is the best of historians. It doesn't suffer from intoxication. It doesn't suffer from memory loss. It doesn't suffer from emotion, desire. It is facts. It is data. And that facts and data will lead you to the truth in this case. But after Ms. Reed was charged, she began what you'll learn is a campaign. A campaign to make public statements. 120, Nightline, Fox 25, a documentary. And we've had an opportunity to get many of her statements in the footage, and we're going to show much of it to you. And her statements to you will confirm what you already know from the science and the data, what you will already conclude from the facts independent about what she did that night. Her word simply confirm that your judgment is sound. And you're going to hear from her own lips in many of her statements, her admissions to extraordinary intoxications, her admissions to driving Leah Lexus, her admissions to being angry at John that night. And I dare say her admissions that she told but to play for you clip one, you're going to hear the first of the statements that she made after she was charged.
I can't wait to talk about this in a minute.
I mean, I didn't think I hit him, but could I have clipped him? Could I have talked him in the knee and incapacitated him? He didn't look mortally wounded as far as I could see, but could I have done something that knocked him out and in his drunkenness and in the cold didn't come toward that?
And this would have been the moment you dropped him off at the party.
Yeah, would have had to.
Ladies and gentlemen, I simply ask you to follow the evidence, follow the science, follow the data. Ignore speculation, surmise, conjecture. Stay true to the evidence. It will lead you to the truth. Then on January 29, 2022, a very intoxicated defendant was angry and arguing about the relationship with John O'Keefe. And after the fight was over, she left, but she brought the fight back to him in the form of her SUV. She clipped him, he fell backwards, he broke his head, and then this man who helped, a lifetime of help, was left at the corner of that yard, left to die with no help. The facts, the data, and the evidence will bring you the truth, and the defendant's own words will confirm everything you've already concluded.
Right, thank you, Mr. Jackson.
Okay, before Jackson gets started, oh my gosh. Okay, well, first of all, I thought Hanky, that's what I call him anyways, Hanky was, I thought he was doing pretty good. Normally, like in pretrial motions, he's like just very nasally and fast and like a weasel, and he's just, and here he's taking his time. I like that he's telling a story. And I mean, overall, even though he didn't do the timeline of the help data and the text, but overall, he told a story. There was a beginning, middle, and end. And I think I've done a video before where, as a layperson and potential juror, that's how I would want someone to start opening statements. If you're going to tell me a story, don't be, starting here and there and throwing all this information at me. Give me a generalized story and tell me what I'm going to expect. So overall, I thought that was pretty good, except for the lies that I know he told. And then that clip of her statements, oh my gosh, yeah, she's so guilty because she said that. And nowhere in there did she admit she killed him. which is so stupid, but she's not going to testify. Any defense attorney will tell you, don't testify, because the prosecution is going to twist everything around and just, you're just going to mess up. And I'm sure the reason she's came out, well, first of all, she probably thought we weren't going to have a second trial because she thought she'd be acquitted. A lot of us thought that. Second, she's tired of their shit. She has been railroaded by the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office, some Massachusetts state police officers, and local police officers. I'm not saying all. I back the blue, just not the correct ones. And she's tired of it. And she's a very, very strong, intelligent woman who is just as part of her team, her defense team, as her other lawyers. She goes everything. She, looks through stuff and sees what, she can do to help. She doesn't just sit back and say, okay, y'all do your work and I'm not going to do jack shit. But anyways, so, okay, I think that's all I had for Hank. But overall, he didn't do too bad. Because in the first one, Lolly was a snooze fest. So I have to give Hank some props on that. All right. The only thing, I love Alan Jackson, not the country singer. I mean, I like him too. But the defense attorney, Alan Jackson, he's good. But he can come off intimidating. So the last trial, he did the closing statements. So this time around, they've swapped it, and David Yannetti, who's on the other side of Karen, closest to the O'Keefe family, he is going to be doing the closings. And Alan, this time, is going to do the openings. So I hope he doesn't come off intimidating. I'd like to see a little softer with him, not just just he's a hard hitter. But he's very passionate, and that's just how it comes out. So let's see how he does with the opening and see what all he has to say.
Could I have just a moment to readjust?
Sure, they record off.
May I, Your Honor? The evidence in this case will establish above everything else 3 points. There was no collision with John O'Keefe. There was no collision. There was no collision. John O'Keefe did not die from being hit by a vehicle. Period. The facts will show that. The evidence will show that. The data will show that. The science will show that. And the experts will tell you that. You'll learn that the Commonwealth has pinned its entire case on a brazen and a flawed assertion that is untethered, unconnected to the facts and to the evidence. And their assertion is contrary to science. Because at the end of the day, folks, there was no collision with John O'Keefe. So how did we end up here? How does Karen Reed end up sitting in that chair on trial for an event that literally never happened? Well, the evidence is going to explain it. And it can be summed up in the following text message at the very beginning of this investigation. A text message of a now fired Massachusetts state police officer named Michael Proctor. He was the lead investigator on this case, and he was talking about a fellow officer, a fellow cop, who owned the property where John O'Keefe's body was found. Text message with a buddy. Question: is the homeowner going to catch any shit? Answer: nope. He's a Boston cop too. That quote defines the lack of integrity of the Commonwealth's entire case, its entire investigation, and this prosecution. During the course of this trial, you'll learn much more about Mr. Proctor, why he said that, and what it really means.
Rain, make it rain, girl, make it.
Mute. Skip. Okay. I need it. Oh, and unmute. There we go.
A story of a tragic loss. And make no mistake, John O'Keefe's death is and was a tragic and tragic loss. But the story you'll hear is about an investigation that was riddled with errors from the beginning, a rush to judgment, conflicted, and corrupted from the start. Corrupted by bias, corrupted by incompetence, and corrupted by deceit. Finally, it was corrupted by a deliberate effort to avoid and to cover up the very truth that you are seeking. You'll find when you hear the evidence that the Commonwealth's case is the literal definition of reasonable doubt. They won't be able to talk their way out of it. They won't be able to explain their way out of it. They won't be able to excuse their way out of it. And they can't meet their extreme burden of proof, which the court will tell you is beyond any and all reasonable doubt and to a moral certainty. Members of the jury, Karen Reed.
Okay, I'm going to pause just a second. I'm so glad he is bringing up reasonable doubt, because in the first trial, one of the jurors was interviewed by Aiden Carney, Turtle Boy, and it was apparent they did not know what reasonable doubt meant. And if you don't either, I have a video that I did on reasonable doubt that watch it and goes in depth about it, even has a cool comic book in it. But anyways, so I'm really glad he's hitting that, because that is something that these jurors, I think, once they've gone through however many weeks of trial, and then they've got to go in and deliberate with all, these people, and then they forget what reasonable doubt is, and I think they're trying to solve the case. And that's not what they're here to do. They're here to see if the prosecution has met their burden, and the evidence shows that Karen Reed, hit Officer John O'Keefe with her SUV. And the other weird thing is that I thought was weird when I first heard about this is, where was all the police officers? I mean, when a police officer, officer down, and in my community, I mean, everything shuts down and all the area police officers are like, go. And it doesn't matter if it's on or off duty. And this was an off-duty situation, and not everybody came. They didn't call, they weren't calling everybody. So it was a shame. And I really hope that after Karen hopefully is acquitted, then somebody is going to look into John's death and, link the evidence together and hopefully find out who did it. Well, I think we know, but prove it is the problem.
Found John O'Keefe dead on the front lawn of a Boston police officer, Brian Albert, at 6 a.m. on January 29th, 2022. Picture the scene. Blood-curdling screams, ambulances, emergency lights on, fire engines, ladder trucks, paramedics, patrol vehicles, patrol cruisers, police officers, first responders, firefighters, all swarming all over Brian Albert's lawn, literally feet under his bedroom window. Yet Brian Albert, a sworn peace officer, a first responder himself, never came outside. Never went outside to see what the chaos was about, never went outside to see if he could assist a man in need, never walked outside his house to see if he could help a fallen fellow officer on his own front lawn. More shockingly, you'll learn that lead investigator for the Massachusetts police, Michael Proctor, never set foot inside Brian Albert's house that day. Never engaged in any investigation inside that house that day, even though a party with much alcohol had just occurred in that house, and even though a Boston police officer was found dead or dying just mere feet from the front door on that lawn, he never secured the crime scene, never separated and secured witnesses, he never properly collected evidence, he never secured the evidence, he never searched for signs of a struggle inside or outside the home, he never properly canvassed the neighborhood. Michael Proctor never did any of these things, even though fellow officers of Michael Proctor's actually mentioned, in their words, not mine, that it looked like John O'Keefe may have been, quote, in a fight. You'll have questions about that conduct. During the course of this trial, you'll find that the Commonwealth will not have answers. You'll see from the evidence in this case that this case carries a malignancy, one that is spread through the investigation, it's spread through the prosecution from the very start, from the jump. A cancer that cannot be cut out, a cancer that cannot be cured. And that cancer has a name. And his name is Michael Proctor.
Ooh.
Now, you didn't hear his name in the prosecution's opening statement. Not once. And I suspect that was probably by design. Mm-hmm. But make no mistake about it. The evidence will show in this case that Michael Proctor is the very definition of the Commonwealth's case. And he's also their Achilles heel. Mm. He was the lead investigator on the case officer, the architect of the entire prosecution. You'll learn there's not a single part of this case, folks, not a single part that he didn't touch, that he didn't direct, that he didn't orchestrate personally. Every single bit of it has his fingerprints on it. You'll learn that Michael Proctor was a longtime family friend of the Alberts.
Dun, dun,
and he's been disgraced by his own agency, not by us, by the Massachusetts State Police. Investigated, suspended, and fired. The evidence will show that Massachusetts State Police found him guilty, found Michael Proctor guilty of bringing dishonor to the department for his conduct, not in some other case, not in some tangential case, in this case. The investigation of Karen Reed. Conduct that included bias in favor of his friends, the all-powerful Albert family, and bias against my client, Miss Reed, the outsider. Do you have any idea how hard it is for a state trooper to get fired? The evidence is going to show that Michael Proctor earned it. Every bit of it. You'll hear that within hours of a Boston police officer being found dead on Brian Albert's lawn, Michael Proctor, the lead investigator, who had investigated exactly nothing up to this point, right at the beginning, made an early pronouncement that Brian Albert himself was not going to, quote, catch any shit, end quote. And that was for one reason, and one reason only. He's a Boston cop.
Oh, well, that too.
The evidence will show that Michael Proctor made this statement in a text conversation with his high school buddies. A text he never thought would see the light of day, certainly never thought we would get a hold of. And when he thought no one was looking, he actually said the quiet part out loud. He's a cop too. We'll give him a pass.
Oh my gosh. I don't want to hear that. Skip.
You'll learn that in Michael Proctor's world, rank has its privileges. And the evidence will show that's privileges that you don't get and I don't get.
Ooh,
but
nice.
Apparently a Boston police officer, Brian Albert, and his friends, they do get.
Good job.
You'll learn that in Michael Proctor's world, he didn't care about finding the truth. In his world, his priority was to protect the brotherhood, to protect that blue wall, to protect his friends who were at the Alberts' house that night. I want to take a step back, if I could, and spend the next few minutes talking a little bit more detail about what the actual facts in this case will show, not based on speculation, not based on surmise, not based on guesswork or conjecture, but the actual true facts that you will learn through the course of this trial. On January 28, 2022, it was a Friday night. John and Karen had made plans to meet up with friends for drinks. It was a happy and normal night for them. They were affectionate, they were loving, they were in good spirits, nothing out of the ordinary. They started at a local watering hole called C.F. McCarthy's. You've heard that name before and you'll hear it again. And eventually they made their way over to the Waterfall Bar and Grill, another bar where they ended up. When they got to the Waterfall Bar and Grill, the Albert family was already there, already heavily drinking. You'll learn that this was no ordinary family, the Alberts. The Albert family was a well-known Canton family. Some might even describe them as a very powerful Canton family. Brian Albert was there at the waterfall. You'll hear that he's a longtime Boston police officer. His wife, Nicole Albert, was there with him. His brother, Chris Albert, a powerful Canton politician. He sits on the select board. The select board actually governs the police department, the Canton PD. He was there. His wife, Julie Albert, was there. Their daughter, Caitlin Albert, was there. His sister-in-law, Jennifer McCabe, was there. Her husband, Matt McCabe, was also there. They were all there drinking before John and before Karen ever arrived. You'll learn that a man by the name of Brian Higgins, also a law enforcement officer and longtime friend, longtime pal of Brian Albert, he was also there. And the two of them, the two Bryans, had been drinking most of the night together. You'll see video footage from the waterfall, which will show you that Karen and John were happy. They were affectionate. They were caring. They were loving. Just business as usual, out on a date on a Friday night. But that exact same video footage which lead investigator Michael Proctor plainly chose to ignore that video footage. It paints a very different picture of Brian Higgins. You'll learn that Higgins had romantic designs for Karen. That becomes important. Brian Higgins had engaged Karen in flirtatious texts, but days earlier she had put a stop to it. She had ghosted him, in common parlance. In other words, just ignored him. The evidence will show that the first time he saw her and was in her presence after being rejected by her was when she walked into the Waterfall Bar and Grill along with her boyfriend, John O'Keefe. At 11:58 p.m., just minutes before John ultimately arrived at the Albert residence, you'll see a video at the waterfall of an unsettling interaction, troubling interaction between Brian Higgins and John O'Keefe. And unlike the lead investigator, Michael Proctor, in this case, you won't ignore that evidence. As the bar was closing around 12 midnight, the Alberts invited everybody back to their house for a get-together to just keep the night going. And you'll learn that Karen and John ultimately pulled up to the house. They got out of the SUV to make sure they had the right address. You see, neither John nor Karen had ever been to 34 Fairview. They weren't even sure they were at the right address. And the evidence will establish that John got out of the SUV and went into the house. Let me say that again. The facts unequivocally, the data, the science, the witnesses will all unequivocally establish that John O'Keefe went into the Albert home that night. Eyewitnesses and forensic data will establish that fact. When he didn't come back out, you'll learn that Karen grew increasingly frustrated. She got upset. She was left alone in a car, in the cold, in the middle of the night, with the car idling. John had gone into the house. She expected him to come right back out, and when he didn't, seconds turned into minutes, and minutes started to clock away. She left John.
I'm going to stop just a second because I am doing this live stream as if I'm talking to my friends and we're hanging out watching it. But I will tell you, this is one way that I find Karen relatable, because the whole boyfriend going in and you're waiting out in the car and you don't know what is going on or why they're taking so long. Been there, done that, wasn't fun. And I had his kids in the car while he was inside singing karaoke and whatever else. And he was only supposed to run in there for just a minute. So Was I mad? Yes. Now, did I show my ass? No, because there were kids in the car. Whatever. I just want to say that, ladies, you know, we've all been there. Men make us mad. And especially if you've had a few drinks, then your temper's a little more, but not enough to hit somebody with your vehicle.
A voicemail, then another voicemail, voicemail after voicemail after voicemail, text messages. But he was unresponsive. He didn't pick up a single call. He didn't respond to a single text. The longer he didn't respond, the more upset she got. The Commonwealth will intimate, as they already have in their opening statement, that these voicemails are evidence that the two were fighting. The actual evidence in this case, however, will show the exact opposite. You'll hear that Karen was very agitated. You'll hear some voicemails where she's swearing. You'll hear voicemails where she calls him names. There's name calling. But you'll also hear the context of those voicemails. And every single one of them, every single one of those voicemails was left for John after he failed to come back out of the house, after he failed to respond to her voicemails and to her texts. Karen believed John had just left her sitting there, grabbed a beer, was partying with his friends.
Oh, you got Clover.
Yep.
With Clover, the world's smart.
Mute.
The evidence will actually show that John and Karen never had a crossword, not a single crossword that entire evening before he left that SUV and went inside the house. And you will learn what Karen had absolutely no way of knowing at the time. It wasn't that he wouldn't respond to her. It's that he couldn't respond to her. And the evidence will show you why. Let's talk about that. We'll introduce you to a doctor named Elizabeth Lopesada, a renowned forensic pathologist, a medical examiner, and a professor at Brown University. She will tell you that the injury to the back of John's head, first of all, was immediately incapacitating. And that has meaning. At the moment he suffered that fatal head injury, he couldn't walk, talk, grab his phone, cry for help, nothing. He was completely incapacitated, completely unconscious from the moment he suffered that injury. He was completely still and incapable of interacting with anyone or anything. But the doctor will tell you something more, and just as important. She'll tell you that John O'Keefe did not suffer from hypothermia, as the Commonwealth will undoubtedly allege. His body showed no signs of it. No frostbite, no cold-induced injuries to his organs, no damage based on cold or frost. Ladies and gentlemen, the scientific evidence and the medical evidence will establish that John O'Keefe had to be injured somewhere else, somewhere warmer, and his body had to have been moved out into the cold. And that's where, ultimately at 6 a.m., Karen found him the next morning. You will learn that John did not have a single injury consistent with being hit by a car. Let me say that again. The evidence will establish that John did not suffer a single injury on his body consistent with having been hit by a car. Not one. You'll learn that John's torso, his ribs, his chest, his arms, his hips, his legs, his knees, his ankles, his feet, all of them, no broken bones, no fractures, no contusions, no torn ligaments, no internal injuries, not even a bruise. Nothing consistent with a car accident, despite the Commonwealth's contention that he...
I'm going to stop. I can honestly say that what Jackson just said is the truth. I have seen the autopsy pictures. They're not that bad. They're not good, but everything he said, there are no broken bones. There were no bruises from like chest down. Maybe, well, on his arms you'll see. Well, I don't know if they'll show you, but if you decide to Google, the pictures are out there. But anyways, what he just said is true. There was, oh my gosh, I get tore up over this because it's plain to see that it was not a car. When I first saw the marks on John's arms, I thought it was some kind of weird tool marks. And then later, when I heard the dog bite thoughts, and I was like, okay. And then I actually had gotten a new puppy, and she was teething, and she bit on my arm. Same, I had some same marks, and I actually had taken pictures, but I deleted them like an idiot. But anyways, I wanted to have them so I could compare, but oh well. Anyways, so let's go back to Jackson and see how much longer he's got with opening statements.
He was slammed into by a 6,000-pound SUV, not a bruise. Dr. Laposada will tell you with medical certainty that, in fact, John was not struck by a vehicle. Medically and scientifically, he could not have been struck by a vehicle. Therefore, as I said, there was no collision. She will tell you that the patterned abrasions on John's right arm, the patterned abrasions you see over my left shoulder, they're not the result of...
Okay, I was just going to say that it was still pending motion whether the judge was going to allow them to use this picture in their opening statement, so I guess she ruled for it. Trigger warning, I really don't do those because everybody knows what we're talking about, and if this bothers you, then this isn't the channel for you. But anyway, so you're going to see the marks on his arms, and tell me in the chat if you think that this is from a car accident. And be honest. I mean, if you don't, that's fine. And if you do, that's fine.
Being struck by a car or a taillight. You'll take one look at these injuries and you'll agree with Dr. Laposada. The evidence will show that these injuries are from an animal, like a large dog, like the large dog that was inside the Albert house that night. You'll learn that Brian Albert has actually admitted that his large dog, the family dog, is, quote, not good with strangers. And of course, John, never having been to the house before, was a stranger that night. You'll also learn that oddly, very oddly, after having their family pet for 7 years, a short time after this incident, the Alberts got rid of that dog. They called it rehoming her. But she was gone. Dr. Laposada will also tell you that the injury to John's head was not the result of falling backward onto a flat lawn, cold or otherwise. Rather, Dr. Laposada will tell you with medical certainty that the injury pattern to his scalp was produced by an impact from a raised or ledged surface, a surface that does not exist on Brian Albert's front lawn where John was found. The medical evidence will establish no hypothermia, no injuries from a car strike, no collision with a motor vehicle. And forensic analysis of John's cell phone, Mr. Brennan mentioned that in his opening statement. The Commonwealth's own expert will ultimately support the exact facts that I just told you, including the temperature data. John O'Keefe was injured someplace warmer, and he was moved. That alone is reasonable doubt, but there's much more. You'll also learn that there were many people at that after-hours gathering at Brian Albert's house who would have left by the front door just feet from where John O'Keefe's body would have ultimately been, had he actually been there, right after 12:30 a.m., which is what the Commonwealth's claim is. There were nearly a dozen people who walked out that front door directly adjacent to the precise spot where John O'Keefe would have been lying. Not a single person, not one, not a single person, saw a 6'2", 216-pound man laying sprawled in the front lawn in dark clothing on a light white dusting of snow. Not one. Then the evidence will also show that every one of those same people drove by that same spot, not walked by it, drove by it to leave the house, and still not one of them saw John laying in the yard when they left between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. in the morning. But you know who else you'll find never saw a body on that lawn? The snowplow driver, a completely independent witness charged with plowing the streets in Canton that night. You'll hear that Michael Proctor, oh, he's not done yet, Mr. Proctor. You'll hear that Michael Proctor wrote a report where he claimed that Fairview had not been plowed that night. You'll learn that that was completely false. That was a lie. Michael Proctor did not want any more witnesses. He didn't want the truth, and he falsely claimed that the road was never plowed. You'll learn that he wouldn't look for the plow driver, but we did, and we found, and we'll introduce you to, Brian Loughran. He plowed Fairview that night, and what he's going to...
One other thing that I wanted to tell you while she was looking. So they talk about all these people, including myself, you know, we're part of the Free Karen Read movement and all this. And basically all it is we find this relatable, and we, you know, we've seen this corruption in real time on TV. And in the first trial, there was an attorney, and she became an alternate, so therefore she didn't get to be in deliberations. But she is on, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but she is the one right here on the front row with the black headband and glasses, and she is working now for the defense and also got a job at Dave Yanetti's law firm. So if that doesn't tell you, then I'll also let you know that there are 9 law students from Harvard, Boston College, and I can't remember if there's other, that have dedicated their time to this defense as well recently, because they are seeing the injustice that Karen Read is going through. Anyways, okay, I am stepping off my soapbox now and going back to opening statements.
What I'm going to tell you is that there was no body on that lawn at 2:30 in the morning. You'll learn that Brian Loughran passed by 34 Fairview, traveling right next to Brian Albert's front yard, and at 2:30 a.m.,
Liberty
Oh
Mutual
my
has
gosh.
savings for all. Mary had
I get all
a
into the story, and then it's like, ooh, commercial. I need a skip button. Skip. Okay, unmute.
was not there. But you'll see that the plow driver also provides some other troubling information, troubling testimony for the Commonwealth. You'll learn that after making that pass at 2:30 a.m., he showed up with his plow an hour later. He stopped at the entrance of Fairview. He was looking up Fairview to decide whether or not to plow it, but he saw an obstruction. At 3:30 a.m., he looked down the street, and in the very spot precisely where Karen would later find John's body laying at 6 a.m., there was a car parked in front of it, a Ford Edge. You're going to ask yourself, who's moving a car at 3:30 in the morning into a blizzard on the side of the road? You'll learn that Michael Proctor, the lead investigator, intentionally ignored this fact as well. He did no investigation to find out who owned a Ford Edge, but again, we did. And the evidence will establish that Ford Edge happens to be a favorite model of the Albert family. More than one Albert owned a Ford Edge at the time. You'll learn that those facts will add to the mounting and the overwhelming evidence that there was no collision, and John O'Keefe's body was moved onto that lawn. You'll find that this is yet additional reasonable doubt in the case. You'll be introduced to science and physics, even from the Commonwealth's own experts. That science will establish that Karen Read's SUV was not damaged by hitting a pedestrian, and conversely, John O'Keefe's injuries did not come from being struck by a vehicle. The Commonwealth mentioned triggering events, but what you'll actually learn from the experts, some of them the Commonwealth's own experts, is that a triggering event is not evidence of an accident. It does not evidence a collision. That's why we're here. A collision. And there's no evidence of one. Zero.
Nada.
You'll also find that those exact sort of triggering events that the Commonwealth will rely on are relatively commonplace on Karen's SUV, and none of them are associated with a claim of a collision. Folks, the science will not lie, and the physics cannot lie. And that science will tell you with certainty there was no collision with John O'Keefe. You'll add that to that rising mountain of reasonable doubt.
Woo, reasonable doubt
I want to
again.
take you back to the night in question, January 29th, for just a few minutes. Remember, Karen had gone home after dropping off John and John walking to the house. While Karen was asleep at home with John's 13-year-old niece, what were the people who had been at Brian Albert's house that night? What were they doing? While she slept, what you'll find and what the evidence will show is that they were extremely busy. You'll learn that after a long night of heavy drinking, Brian Higgins left the Albert residence, but he didn't drive home. Rather, he drove over to the Canton Police Department, where he kept an office at about 1:25 a.m. Not a Canton police officer, but he kept an office there. Why go back to his office at 1:25 a.m.? Why go back to the Canton Police Department at 1:25 in the morning on the night of a blizzard?
After drinking.
You'll learn that while there, Higgins made a call at 1:30 a.m. Higgins will later deny that he made that call. You'll find that curious. And his explanation for that late-night visit to Canton PD, you'll find that it changes nearly every time he's asked about it. You'll learn that after everyone left Brian Albert's house, Brian Albert actually claimed he had no contact with anybody else except his wife. No contact. Until he woke up the next morning. So he says. Then you'll learn that that, too, is a complete lie. His phone records establish that he placed a call to none other than Brian Higgins at 2:22 a.m. shortly after Higgins completed that late-night visit over to Canton PD. You'll wonder, what did they possibly need to talk about at 2:22 a.m. that night? The evidence will establish that Brian Albert called Brian Higgins first. Brian Albert then disconnected that call when Higgins didn't answer it. Seconds later, Brian Higgins returned the call. Brian Albert then did answer that call. They spoke for 22 full seconds, had a conversation, then they both hung up their respective phones. You'll learn that when they were asked about these calls and conversations, both Brian Albert and Brian Higgins lied about it. Both of them. They said they never had a call with each other. But then ultimately, when they were confronted with their own cell phone records and they could no longer deny the calls, they were asked independently, explain yourself. And they both came up with the exact same explanation. A butt dial.
Raising Cane's invites you to grab life by the chicken fingers. Go.
Yes, you heard that right. In 2025, apparently there are still butt dials going on.
The evidence will make you question, why did Albert and Higgins speak at 2:22 a.m. and why did they both try to cover up that phone call? You'll also learn after this incident and within days of one another, both Brian Higgins and Brian Albert, both police officers, both trained investigators, got rid of their phones. Both of them. And what else you'll learn Brian Albert got rid of? Shortly after this incident, Brian Albert got rid of his house, the whole thing. Just sold it. His childhood home, a home that had been in the Albert family for generations, he literally sold it mere months after this incident. Dog rehomed, phones destroyed, house sold. You'll learn that all these things happened shortly after the incident where John O'Keefe was found unresponsive and dying in Brian Albert's front lawn. And you'll also learn that Michael Proctor looked the other way. He did not investigate any of what I'm telling you. He pre-selected Karen Reed from the start. And he ignored everything and everyone else. Let's get back to what was happening with the others while Karen slept. What you'll learn during this trial is that Brian Albert's sister-in-law, you've heard her name before, Jennifer McCabe, she was at the waterfall that night and she was over at the Alberts' house that evening as well.
That's the one I said was
She
a
left
mean
the
girl.
after-hours gathering about 2 a.m., a little before 2 a.m., got home around 2 a.m. And you'll learn that according to the Commonwealth's own evidence, from a forensic software program called Physical Analyzer made by Cellebrite, it's considered the gold standard for forensic tools, you'll learn that a Google search was discovered on Jennifer McCabe's phone. A Google search that Michael Proctor and his investigators never revealed to us, but we found anyway. A Google search that was time-stamped, according to their own data, at 2:27 a.m. 5 minutes after that 2:22 a.m. call that Higgins and Albert denied having. And that Google search on Jennifer McCabe's phone read, "Hoslong to die in cold."
Who Googles that?
Hoslong to die in cold. Now, she misspelled the first word. Hos is supposed to be how, but the meaning's the same. How long does it take to die in the cold? Time-stamped, 2:27. And then that search was also noted by the same Cellebrite program as having been deleted. The evidence will force you to ask, why is there a search on her phone? Why is it logged at 2:27 a.m.? When the Commonwealth claims that she first learned of John's death and where his body was hours later at 6 a.m. So what you'll learn is that while Karen slept, here's what was actually happening by some other very busy bees. 1:25 a.m., Brian Higgins makes an unexpected visit to Canton PD. 1:30 a.m., he makes a phone call that he later denies ever making. At 2:22 a.m., Brian Higgins and Brian Albert talk. They both deny and lie about having made that phone call. 2:27 a.m., 5 minutes later, a Google search appears on Jennifer McCabe's phone, "Hoslong to die in cold," hours before John's body was ever discovered. A Google search she denies making, and that she later, or at least it was later logged as deleted.
Okay, this is what I love about his opening, and I was complaining about the timeline that Brennan or Hank was trying to discuss in his opening, and then he started jumping around, and I said, I don't like that, because if you're going to tell something in order, do it in order. Also, the jury will be able to follow it. So not only did he verbally tell, now I'm talking about Jackson, he verbally told the story or what he wanted to convey to the jurors, and threw the times in there, no big deal. Now he's going back and he's actually physically, like he's reading a timeline. So I love that. Not only does it help for my notes, but it's putting that back into the jurors' heads to, give them a more, okay, this is how this came together, and it's a timeline that's in order. So good job, Jackson, on that one.
Meanwhile, at 2:30 a.m., the plow driver confirms that O'Keefe's body was not on the lawn of Brian Albert's house, not at 2:30 in the morning. And at 3:30 in the morning, that area was obstructed by a Ford Edge like the one the Albert family liked to own. The evidence will show in the meantime, Karen dozed in and out of a fitful sleep for the rest of the night, only to awaken just before 5 a.m., and that's when she realized, in a panic, John had never come home. And you'll see, it wasn't like John to not come home. That morning, you'll see and hear evidence that Karen's emotions had morphed. It'd gone from frustration and anger, which you'll hear in the voicemails, to abject fear. Fear that something bad had happened. The evidence will establish by this time Karen was panic-stricken. She had a feeling something was very, very wrong. She was unable to get a hold of John. Karen went to go look for him. She got in her Lexus, and she backed up to leave her garage at One Meadows. You'll hear a lot about that address, One Meadows. That was John's house, where Karen was staying. She backed out of the garage, and during the course of the trial, you'll hear that she actually struck another car with that right rear taillight.
If your neck looks like this, you need to watch this video. When you
I'm not paying for YouTube. I'm not paying for YouTube.
Commonwealth is going to desperately claim that Karen Reed's taillight was actually damaged by hitting John O'Keefe. They'll have no evidence of it, mind you, none. But they'll make the claim. We'll show you a video of exactly how that taillight was originally damaged, or exactly what happened at 5:07 in the morning. The facts will show that it was damaged in John's own driveway at 5:07 when Karen backed up and made contact with another car in the driveway. This is 5 hours after she dropped John off and he went into the Albert residence. As a result, the taillight was minimally cracked, but it wasn't completely shattered or damaged or broken. And that's the condition of the SUV when Michael Proctor got a hold of it. That becomes important. You'll hear from an independent police officer, an eyewitness to the damage on that SUV, someone not connected to Michael Proctor or under his control. And he'll tell you that he saw the taillight damaged before it was in Michael Proctor's possession, but it was not completely shattered. And you won't have to speculate how that taillight got cracked originally. You'll see it for yourself. It's on video. You'll learn that part of the reason that Karen's Lexus hit that car at One Meadows is because she backed out looking for him at a time when she was absolutely panic-stricken and grief-stricken. Where was John? Why hadn't he come home? What had happened to him? Is he hurt? Is he passed out somewhere? Her mind was reeling. The evidence will establish she wasn't giving anything away. Everything was on the table. What could have happened to John? You'll learn that when she woke up and he still wasn't home, she was just racking her brain for what could have happened to him, and she was worried about possibly the worst. He had gotten out of the car, he'd walked to the house, she was confused, and later, when she found him at 6 a.m. on the lawn, where she last saw him going toward the house, her mind started reeling, oh my God, did a plow hit him? Did I hit him? Could I have hit him? What could have happened to him? And that video clip that you saw, out of context, when she said the words, he did not look like he was mortally wounded, she's not talking about at midnight. She's talking about at 6 a.m. when she found him. That's what she was talking about.
Thank you.
Your job will be to make sure that the evidence isn't presented to you too cute by half.
Now that, I don't know what it means. Too cute.
She was saying all those things. Did a plow hit him? Could I have hit him? Did I hit him?
Jurors might
She was saying that to herself and to other people. And the Commonwealth, very obviously, will try to seize on that panic and twist this into some admission. But here's the actual truth. That's not a confession. Could I have hit him? Did I hit him? Could a plow have hit him? That's a person trying to make sense of an unexplainable circumstance, a natural concern of a bereaved significant other.
Yes. If you've ever been in shock, which I have, after a car accident that I had when I was 17, but your mind it's blank and you're looking at whatever's in front of you and it's just trying to make sense, and it's like you just don't have any control. You don't know what's going on. What is this? What just happened? Nothing is making sense. And then you start thinking, like, for example, when on true crime channels and somebody's telling a story and they always find like a body. They always said, I thought it was a mannequin. And you'll hear that a lot. And that's because your brain, that is not normal for us to just go walking or fishing or whatever and find a body. So your first thought is something that big, it's a mannequin. And then reality starts setting in, and then you're like, oh, here's the reality. That's not a mannequin, that's a dead body. And that's the same thing I think Karen was doing. She was going through shock. She had all this stuff in her mind. Did a plow hit him? Trying to come up with why he ended up where he did. And the Commonwealth, they try to use that against her.
A woman desperately trying to piece together what could have happened on this tragic night. John didn't come home. And the evidence will show that Karen Reed never said, I hit him. Never. Not in the background of the 911 recording, not on any dash cam video, not on any audio, not on any police body cam, not to a first responder. It's never mentioned in a single report. It's never reported in a single report from January 29th, not by one person, because it never happened. The evidence will show that the evidence will show that there were at least 13 members of law enforcement or first responders and 2 civilian witnesses that were intently focused on what was happening at that scene. They were all over the lawn. They were all over Karen. Officer Sarath, Mullaney, Good, Lank, EMT Nuttall, Flamati, Kelly, Walsh, Woodbury, Whitley, Becker, Robery, McLaughlin, Carrie Roberts, Jennifer McCabe. They were all there, watching and listening. On January 29th, when John O'Keefe was found, not one first responder reported having heard Karen Reed say the words, "I hit him." Not one.
Because if all that chaos was going on and the victim's girlfriend is there and she's screaming and then she says, I hit him. You don't think she's not going to be questioned and probably hauled off to jail right then? She did not say, I hit him. Or she would have been in custody right then. It's so ignorant, and I don't even know why they're saying that. And that's why people are, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist by no means, but I can't help because I do know how jobs work. It's like, go along with what they say so you don't get in trouble, or you can keep your job so you don't, you need the pay, you need the insurance, you need this, that. I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine, and blah, blah, whatever. Or if somebody gets in trouble, okay, I'll cover for you this time, but you owe me. Those kind of things. That happens in real life. And I think this is what happened in this case. And I think these people that say it, somebody got to them. Either, I don't know. I don't know how they got to them, but they got to them. Because, like I said, there's nothing that shows that no recording, no video that says, I hit him.
Not one civilian reported having heard Karen Reed say, I hit him. The facts will show that the first time this improved statement was ever claimed to have been made was some 24 hours later by a single EMT in an interview. Now listen to this. In an interview coordinated by a Canton police detective named Kevin Albert.
Oh my gosh.
Brian Albert's brother. And remember, Chris Albert, the other brother, is a board selectman to whom the Canton Police Department reports. And what's more, you'll learn that Katie McLaughlin, that's the EMT, that's the single EMT, the first person to have claimed to have heard this unrecorded and unreported statement, is years-long close personal friends with a young woman named Caitlin Albert. You heard that right. It's Brian Albert's daughter. During the course of this trial, you'll become familiar with and you'll realize that the Alberts are indeed a powerful and indeed an influential family. And that will mean something. You'll learn that there are other major problems with the prosecution's case. The evidence will establish that Michael Proctor himself, the lead investigator and architect of this entire case, has a long-standing and personal relationship with the Albert family. Yes, that same Albert family.
Savings you just can't beat.
Oh, gosh. Mute. Come on, give me a skip button. Finally.
He's friends with Julie Albert. He personally sat at head tables at weddings, or at a head table at weddings with the Albert family. He entrusted the Alberts with babysitting his own children. You heard that correctly. And yet he was the lead detective assigned to investigate the circumstances of a Boston police officer laying dead on the Alberts' front lawn. That's not just bias, you'll learn. That's not just coincidence. That, folks, is corruption. And you'll see how far it went. Michael Proctor was alone with all the critical evidence in this case, along with Karen Reed's phone, along with John's phone, along with video footage, along with the taillight material, alone when he claimed to recover evidence from 34 Fairview. He wrote the search warrants. He transported the evidence. He secured it. He submitted it. He did it all. That's Michael Proctor. And he did it without any reasonable oversight. You'll see during the trial that he intentionally lied and fabricated evidence during the course of this investigation. He lied in reports, warrants, he lied under oath. He lied about the time that he actually secured Karen Reed's vehicle. Why? Why would he lie about that? The evidence will give you the answer. He lied because he did not want it revealed that he had access to that vehicle and he had access to that taillight before any taillight fragments were found at 34 Fairview. Appreciate that. He had access to the vehicle before a single piece of taillight material was ever found at the scene. You'll find that there were two searches. The first and second search found zero. Nothing. Nothing around John's body. Nothing in the street. Not one piece of taillight fragment. But once Michael Proctor had that SUV and had the taillight in his custody and control, suddenly items started magically showing up. And not just a few items. 46 pieces of bright red taillight laying in the snow, supposedly found in the exact same spot that was searched not once, but twice by independent officers. It came up with zero. To be clear, you'll learn that before Michael Proctor had access to that taillight, not a single piece was ever recovered at 34 Fairview. That will become vitally, vitally important. And what about those shards of plastic, by the way? What about this DNA that the Commonwealth mentioned? They're going to try to dazzle you with talk of DNA because it sounds so scientific. DNA was on the taillight. But you'll learn that there was no DNA on the actual shards that they claim came in contact with John's arm. None. There was no blood, no tissue, no skin, no DNA on a single shard of plastic that they claim cut deep abrasions into John's arm, the arm that you saw overhead. The DNA that was actually found, the actual science will show it was found outside of the taillight housing where anyone with access to that vehicle would have touched. And it wasn't just one male's DNA. In that exact same sample, there were 3 men found. John and 2 unidentified males. So unless the Commonwealth is going to shift their theory that that SUV hit 3 men that night, their entire theory falls apart. And speaking of DNA, the evidence will further establish that John O'Keefe's shoe, the one that he was wearing when he was found, was sampled. And that DNA revealed 5, count them, 5 unidentified males. Recall that the evidence will establish independently that John was injured someplace warmer and had to be moved onto that lawn. 5 unidentified males touching that shoe. You'll also learn that you are not the first person, not the first to hear about the Commonwealth's theory of this case, that John was hit by an SUV. That's their theory. The Commonwealth presented this exact same claim to their own medical examiner, a woman by the name of Dr. Irini Scorti-Bello. And you'll learn that after reviewing what's called a law enforcement accident notifier, with law enforcement's theory of the collision written in it, defined in it, after conducting the autopsy herself, after examining John's injuries in detail, she refused to conclude that John's death was a homicide based on the Commonwealth's presentation and their theory. That's right.
She didn't
the
bend the knee.
Commonwealth's own medical examiner will not deem the manner of death in this case, a homicide. She won't do it. But they're nonetheless back again trying to present the exact same theory to you in this trial. Again, the evidence will show that that is reasonable doubt.
Woo!
Throughout this trial, the Commonwealth will try to convince you of paranormal events, phones calling themselves, messages deleting themselves, Google searches made and then unmade, evidence magically appearing and evidence magically disappearing. But all that smoke and all those mirrors will not ever reach their burden.
Ever feel like creation should just flow? With Wix.
Do you ever just get in a show and then a commercial comes on? Because that's what's going on right here. Skip. Okay.
What this case is ultimately about. It's about the Commonwealth's burden of proof. You'll learn that during the trial, the Commonwealth bears the highest burden known to our justice system. They must prove every element of every charge beyond a reasonable doubt and to a moral certainty. And you'll learn that moral certainty means the highest level of certainty known in human affairs. It's not a small thing. And they're not going to be able to do that. Not when every piece of this case was handled by a disgraced investigator with a motive to protect his friends, not when the physical evidence contradicts their very theory, not when their own medical examiner won't call this case a homicide based on the exact theory that they're presenting to you, not when the conduct of those in the House and the utter lack of investigation speaks volumes about those who actually have something to hide. By the end of this trial, you'll conclude that Karen Reed is not guilty of hitting John O'Keefe with her SUV. There was no collision. She's the victim of a botched and biased and corrupted investigation that was never about the truth, folks. It was about preserving loyalty. You'll find that this case is the very definition of reasonable doubt.
Yes.
And at the end of this trial, we'll ask you to return the only verdicts, all three of them, that are consistent with the evidence, the science, the truth, and justice. Not guilty, not guilty, not guilty.
Oh, yes. Love it.
Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Folks, why don't we take our morning recess?
Okay, I'm going to stop right here and change this just a second. Hold on. Everything on my screen went away. There we go. Okay. Still new to this. That's why I needed to practice. So, y'all that's watching, I appreciate it. And those that are on the rewatch, I appreciate it as well. Okay, so that was a fantastic opening statements from Jackson. The reason I kept going, oh, and excited and ooh, and whatever about him mentioning reasonable doubt is a lot of us online talked about, after watching the jurors interview with Aiden Carney, that, you know, they didn't know what reasonable doubt was. And, you know, and I made a video, a girl made a comic book, and you know, we were just talking about how people do not understand what reasonable doubt means. And, or if they do, they forget. So I loved that he went through and ever so often he would remind them, like, okay, here's an example of reasonable doubt, because that's their job, is to, you know, did they find the defendant guilty beyond a shadow of reasonable doubt? Or, you know, not whatever. But, so I was so excited. I mean, he like said it. Let's see here. 1, 2. Oh, that was third. Let's see here. 4, 5. He mentioned it 6 times, which was fantastic. And like I said, you know, we were talking online. We're in a group that actually, Karen's in the group and her cousin. And I know that they go online to see what we say, to come up with ideas. They want to know what people are thinking, what they feel, you know, what could help Karen's case. And just, you know, we started a post and we just talked about how reasonable doubt needed to be, like, you know, drilled into the jurors' heads, because like I said, they didn't know what it meant. They didn't, if they did, they forgot about it, and tried to solve the case. And then they just said, oh, well, John was there and Karen was there. And then Karen was there where John was found, so she's guilty. That is what the juror said. Drove me nuts. I was like, holy shit. if this had happened to me and some idiot, stated I was guilty because I was there and there was no other evidence that linked me except that I was there, that is scary. And if you don't find that scary, then good for you. But it's very scary. And again, that's why I'm going up there to Dedham and bring awareness of corruption that is going on in the town of Canton. The citizens are really having a hard time. And somebody from a small town, we've dealt with stuff. I know how they feel. I mean, am I going to do anything? I mean, is anything going to come of me going there? I don't know. Maybe somebody will pay attention and have another person to go, oh, yeah, something's not going on. Something's not right in Massachusetts. Something's not right with their laws in Massachusetts. They've got a lot of corruption going on. And I don't use that term loosely. I've seen it. I've seen it since August 2023. I've seen it in real time, and I'm fed up with it. And I probably would have went during the first trial, but it did not work out for me. So this time it has worked out, and I just don't. This is something I don't do. I don't just say, "Oh, I'm going to go fly somewhere and go up there and burn my bra and protest," which that's not what they do. They sit in lawn chairs. They're very peaceful. And they just talk and hold up signs, but they're going to be in a buffer zone. And so, for example, like if I walk in front of the courthouse, because the judge has fixed this buffer zone, 200 feet buffer zone. So if, say, like where I wanted to go, I'd have to walk in front of the courthouse on the sidewalk, which is what's going to happen. And if I have a free Karen Reed t-shirt or anything that says free Karen Reed or something about justice for John O'Keefe, or if I've got a pink shirt, just a plain pink shirt, like say if I had a pink dress on, do you know that would go against the order and I could be arrested? And I'm not being dramatic, folks, because the locals are already saying that the police are serious about this, and there's already 4 or 5 people that have already filed a lawsuit against the judge because they have already been either not arrested, but they feel like it's infringing on their First Amendment rights to be able to protest. And one guy, he just had a sticker on his jacket, and the policeman like grabbed him and yanked the sticker off, and then another guy who was does YouTube, and he's a gentleman, not like these kids that go out there and try to start shit, and he works with the attorney, so he was like filming, for some footage, and they counted how many times he walked by, which was 6 times. And I don't know what they did to him, but I don't know if they roughed him up or whatever. So he's in on the same lawsuit. And I'm like, it is crazy. So, yeah, I'm not nervous, but who knows? And I tell people, you better save up some bail money for me because you never know. And everybody's like, Heather, you're so... No, I'm being serious. I've already told my mom. I've already told my dance instructor and his wife. And now anybody that's watching this, please just take your rainy day fund or something like that and make a note for Heather in case she gets arrested in Denham. But anyways, we're going to be positive that that's not going to happen. And we'll just see what happens. But anyways, so again, this was great. I was glad that, it was heard that, reasonable doubt needed to be, really hammered in on the opening statements. He did great with telling a story, and putting the timeline together and, just picking out those facts and whereas, Brendan just kind of like, plastic containers, no, red Solo cups, he just he told a fantasy story where Jackson told the truth. So, all right. I know they weren't finished, but I want to take a break and I may have dinner or whatever. I know they got to at least one witness. And so I'm probably going to come back maybe about 6 or so and start that stream because I would like to be caught up for tomorrow. But anyways, and then we'll just see. We'll just play it by ear because that's how it works around here with me. Nothing works right, and I can't do a schedule, and I'll say, oh, I'll do it at whatever time. But that doesn't happen because this is real life, and I don't have a production team to help me. But anyways, okay, so have a good dinner and whatever else you're doing, and just be sure to please subscribe and like, so and make sure the notification bell's on so that you know when I go live, because I seriously never know when I'm going to be able to go live, and I really want to stay on top of this case because it means so much to me, and it's in my heart to help spread the word. So, all right, well, I will see y'all later, and stay safe, be aware of your surroundings, and please, whatever you do, please do the right thing.